Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So today we're going to be looking at something that I think I should expand more. Looking at what I'd already said on my previous videos, okay? So today we're going to be looking at laboratory quality. But before we get into that, my name is Dr. Emmanuel Ogbodo. I've been working in the UK as a specialist biomedical scientist, and I'm also a lecturer in biomedical science here in the United Kingdom. So let's get into this, okay? Now, when we talk about laboratory quality, I want us to know that it is under quality management system. You know, in the past, I'd already looked at something like UCAS accreditation. I've also looked at something like laboratory quality control. I've also looked at something like laboratory audit and all of that. And I say that they are all under quality management system. Anyway, even when I've looked at NEQUA's laboratory report, okay, when external quality control, when they give their report and all of that, they are all form of quality management system. So if you've not watched my video on maybe NEQUA's report or UCAS accreditation or laboratory audit and so on, I would suggest that you watch it. You can see the link up there, okay? Now, before I continue, I think I want to make something, very clear for us. When we look at laboratory quality, which is quality management system, there is a lot of things that I really want us to pay attention to. One of the key things that I want us to understand is what we call ISO laboratory. So when we talk about ISO laboratory, what exactly are we talking about? And what is even ISO laboratory? So when we talk about ISO, you are looking at International Standardization Organization. So this International Standardization Organization, okay, there has been a different code from its inception to date. For example, ISO standard 15189, so it's a code, and this code, it has different sections, and each of each section will tell you in detail what it wants, and so on. So these are the things maybe you can look up online. But what I really want to say, when you look at this International Standardization Organization, what are they there for? But before I explain in detail what they are there for, can I also make you aware of another body which is also known as International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, which is what we call ILAC. So this ILAC, in conjunction with this ISO laboratory, work with different countries. So many countries they work together with ISO laboratory. They are the member of ILAC. Also meaning that they work in conjunction to make sure that the policy that is made at the international level, okay, will be carried out in each of the individual countries. What does that mean? The idea is that if something is done in the United Kingdom and you take the same sample and you go and do it in Canada or maybe Australia or any part of the world, you're supposed to get the same result. So that is the essence of making sure that each laboratory, each hospital in all the countries, in different countries, they are within this very International Standardization Organization, which is ISO laboratory. So this ISO laboratory aim to see that there is standard irrespective of the country where the sample is being processed and all of that. So each of these very country accreditation bodies will now work together with the ILAC to see that this very ISO laboratory standard will be achieved in each of these very countries. Now let me give you an example. For example, when you look at something like Australia, their own accreditation body is called NATA, which means National Association of Testing Authority. It is Australia Laboratory Assessment or Accreditation Body, and they are the member of they also work in line with ILAC and also ensuring that overall ISO laboratory policy and standard is maintained in Australia. Now let us look at another country like maybe US. In US, you're going to have what they call A2LA, which means the American Association of Laboratory Accreditation. What this again means that this very regulatory body or this body, they are the one responsible to see that laboratory in America is accredited, and therefore they will work up to the standard that will reflect the overall ISO laboratory standard. I don't know if you are getting this. Now when you come to a place like Canada, you are going to have CAAC, which is called the Canadian Association for Laboratory Accreditation. Again, we suggest that they are responsible to see that all the laboratories in Canada, okay, they function according to ISO laboratory standard. So in other words, when you look at the SOPs or when you look at documentation, a lot of documentation that we have in the laboratory, they all reflect the ISO laboratory standard. I hope that makes sense. And I was trying to say that in this ISO laboratory standard, it has different code right from the time it was started. So there has been some change, and I hope there's still going to be change in the future. But what it means that as they make policies, as things continue to happen, the activity that goes on in the laboratory will continue to expose the area that may need to review and edit it. And at the international level, that will then be reviewed, and then they're going to make new policies. Again, because of each of these very countries, their accreditation bodies are part of this very ISO laboratory standard. They will take those new policies to their individual countries and make sure those policies are implemented. The overall idea or aim is to see that there's going to be international standard irrespective of where the test is carried out. And of course, here in the United Kingdom, we have what we call UCAS, okay? Which, of course, I've already made a video on UCAS. If you've not watched the video, you can watch it. So UCAS, they are the one in charge of laboratory accreditation here in the United Kingdom. Now, what am I trying to say? Because of this very structure, this complex structure of making sure that there's going to be standard in the laboratory, then in order to see that there's going to be a laboratory quality, a lot of things need to be considered. One is what we call laboratory management structure. Maybe what you can look at in the United Kingdom, you can call it NHS, management structure, or you can call it maybe laboratory management structure. Now, let me explain that a little bit. Because when we talk about quality, there is a lot of things that we look at in quality management system. It's not just the quality control that you perform. It's not even just the audit. It's not even just the external quality control. It's not even, a lot of things, validation and all of that. Why they are all part of the quality control, quality management system. But there's a personnel. So in order to make sure that laboratory are within conformance, some people have to make sure that they put up guidance or guidelines to make sure that they enforce to see that people comply to the requirement of ISO standard laboratory. I hope this makes sense. So that's why let me talk about, NHS hospital or private hospital. They can have, a level, different structures from maybe the person that oversees the overall hospital and so on. But let me just focus on the laboratory. So in the laboratory, you are going to have laboratory manager, maybe overall laboratory manager or laboratory services manager. Now, under the laboratory manager, there are different subunits of the laboratories. For example, remember, biomedical science lab or pathology laboratory includes something like hematology, transfusion, microbiology, immunology, virology, and so on, like biochemistry, histopathology, so many of those, this thing. So when you look at this, what is going to happen is there's going to be overall manager of that laboratory, and this overall manager of the laboratory will oversee each of the individual managers of each of the units. In other words, there's going to be a manager in blood transfusion, there will be a manager in hematology, there will be a manager in microbiology, there will be a manager in biochemistry, there will be a manager in histopathology. So these are the structures, and each of these structures aim to see that there's going to be standard in that laboratory, that the standard, that the laboratory is going to be within conformance. They will make sure that they are there to enforce, to make sure that the laboratory will continue to maintain or fulfill the requirement of ISO laboratory standard. Now, under each of these very laboratory subunit laboratory managers, you can get something like maybe senior biomedical scientists, or what we sometimes call advanced biomedical scientists, okay, which are the Band 7. Even under the Band 7, or even in some hospital, you might get a special office such as training officer. So you have training officer, you can even have something like quality management officer, and so on. Each of these very offices or positions they create, the overall is to make sure that the laboratory will continue to be within conformance. So it's a structure that you see. Then from there you can have specially biomedical scientists, and so on. It goes on and on, even up to the specimen reception. Even in the specimen reception, they have their own specimen reception manager. So that one will also make sure that he or she will continue to enforce and see that that department will be fulfilling the requirement of ISO laboratory standard. What I'm trying to say that when we talk about quality management system or laboratory quality, it starts from our preparation of laying down these very structures to see that there's going to be people who are responsible to see that quality is maintained in the laboratory. But in saying that elsewhere, can I also say that in maintaining quality in the laboratory is everyone's business? In other words, irrespective of your position, it's your duty to see that everything you are doing are within standard. Remember that in the laboratory, you should not ideally do anything if you've not actually been trained for it and be signed competent to be able to carry out that duty. So that is actually what happened when we look at the structure in seeing that the laboratory maintain standard. I guess the next question should now be, what is really quality? When we talk about quality, what do we mean when we say laboratory quality? Now, what I want you to understand is this. When you look at laboratory, you already know we perform, we carry out tests, to be able to help the doctors to be able to, diagnose a patient of any illness as the case may be. But when we look at the laboratory quality, we're looking at the standard. So in the laboratory setting, when you look at the laboratory quality, you're looking at the processes or the system that make sure that the results that we produce in the laboratory, they will be accurate, they will be reliable, they are reproducible, and so on. So that system or that process that makes sure that happens is what we call laboratory quality. Now that we've known this, it does not mean then that in order to make sure that this very standard is going to be maintained, you see where personnel comes in. So I've talked about the laboratory manager and so on, the advanced biomedical scientists, the specialty biomedical scientists, even the specimen reception, even the phlebotomist. These are part of, when you look at the pre-analytical phase, hopefully we'll get into that. Because do you know that irrespective of how good you are as a biomedical scientist, if there is something wrong at the pre-analytical phase of that sample collection, it doesn't matter, you are going to generate, the result that will be generated is going to be a wrong result. This is where the personnel comes in. In other words, it means that the personnel or the laboratory staff, are the one that enforce and see, they are the central force that see that the quality is maintained. What it then means that for the staff to be able to maintain this very quality, the staff has to be fully trained. In other words, train them in such a way that they can be competent to be able to carry their job. There's a difference between, being trained and being competent. So when you are undergoing training, you may not be competent to do that. So the idea of the training is to get the staff to be competent, where he or she can be able to carry out that task even unsupervised. But when you are doing the training, you can still be working under supervision. But once you are competent, you can actually work, with that supervision. Anyway, the whole idea to see that the quality will be maintained in the laboratory is that the staff become competent. And for the staff to become competent in carrying their tasks, that means they have to be fully trained. And therefore, staff, they are the central force of seeing that the quality is maintained in the laboratory. If something goes wrong at the training level, what it means that overall that member of staff is likely to produce results or is likely to deliver services that will fall short of the requirement of ISO laboratory standard. I hope this is making sense. Laboratory is a complex setting, and in the complex setting of the laboratory, you are looking at the pre-analytical phase, you are looking at the analytical phase, and you are looking at post-analytical phase. So what it means that even though in the laboratory, we might think that phlebotomists, they are not the member of the laboratory. We might think that the nurses and the doctors, they are not the member of the laboratory. But it is these doctors or the nurses or the phlebotomy that collect the samples. So meaning that they even need to understand the importance of mixing the sample properly. Let's say when you are doing full blood count sample and it's collected on the EDTA, they need to understand there is an EDTA anticoagulant, in that sample bottle, and it needs to be properly mixed to avoid clot. You see it now. If they don't know that, you as a biomedical scientist was not the one that take the sample. Therefore, it means that if that sample clotted, if you don't notice, you are likely to give a wrong result. You see why the training is not just within the laboratory. You also make sure that at the pre-analytical phase of the sample collection, the personnel that collect the sample, everybody understand the requirement and what is expected to see that the standard is maintained. Then when you look at the analytical phase, that is actually where, maybe we as a biomedical scientist comes in. Remember Now, even the pre-analytical, you look at the specimen reception, they receive the sample and all the activity that goes on there, even before the sample comes to the analyzer, they need to be monitored. There has to be standard. If something goes wrong there, everything goes wrong. Then after that is done, then you now load the sample onto the analyzer or you perform the test, and that is where the biomedical scientist comes in. And then how we go about it will also go a long way to see the overall outcome. Now let me explain why training is very important. You know, there's a difference between maybe especially biomedical scientist and just a biomedical scientist or a biomedical scientist trainee. What it means that the interpretation, the idea, the judgment, okay, the way especially biomedical scientist will think about a result may be different, not maybe, is most likely to be different with the way a biomedical scientist may think about the result, or even a BMS trainee will think about the result. In other words, the level of training can have impact on the result that we generate, and this is why training is very, very important. So that is why at the analytical phase, that member of a biomedical scientist need to be competent in carrying out that test. That way, the person can be able to generate, a very good result. Then from there, we can now go after what happened at the analytical phase, which is the post-analytical. I hope this makes sense. So each of these very phases has to be regulated to see that the laboratory are within conformance. Now, let me give you an example. I have mentioned under pre-analytical sample collection, you can look at sample transportation when the laboratory transporters go to maybe to the GP or whatever, and take those samples and then transport it to the lab. They don't know much about the samples, but then they need to be trained how to handle those samples. You see now, because if the samples are not properly handled through the transportation, it will affect the result. And also, of course, you look at the specimen reception. These are all under, from even the phlebotomies, these are all under pre-analytical. And like I mentioned about the analytical, where the biomedical scientists, they have to carry out the test. And remember that in carrying out the test, you then have to do quality control. And of course, the quality control of your analyzer or the system or the equipment you're using has to pass first before you can be able to run the test. In other words, that very biomedical scientist should be trained that before you can run a test, you must have done a quality control. And for you to do a quality control, you must also know how to interpret that quality control to know has it passed or did it not pass, to make sure you are not biased in your interpretation of quality control result. I hope this makes sense. Then after that, we can now look at the post-analytical, where the result is being reported. So the person that is authorizing the result or validating the result or releasing the result need to be able to understand the significance, the implication of what he's doing or she's doing. I hope this makes sense. And of course, in addition to that, there could be something like maybe record keeping, where you have to keep some information regarding the result that you've generated and so on and so forth. So these are the post-analytical. I'll give you an example. I like to use example when I talk because it helps people to understand. Imagine that you have done a test, and this very test, especially this can happen in blood bank, where a patient might have a kind of antibodies, as the case may be. Even in hematology, there could be a certain kind of condition that will require that a patient requires special treatment. If we don't have proper record keeping, we might give a service that cannot benefit that very patient. And that is why keeping a record, of the patient would then help us to be able to guide us on how to be able to give services, render services to that patient in a way that it can benefit that patient's record. I hope this makes sense. So this is how both the pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical sees that the quality is maintained within laboratory. Like I've said, there are many factors that can affect sample result. For example, you look at numerous factors like human personnel, lack of training, like the transportation. There are even poor quality of step. Like when there's a poor quality of the step taken in carrying out that test, even the SOP, standard operating procedure, when it does not reflect, ISO laboratory standard, that can then affect the result that is going to be generated. Now, of course, error in some cases may be inevitable, but there should be a way to be able to minimize those errors, and that is the essence of the training. Now we are talking about laboratory quality, and we've mentioned this thing. So laboratory quality, another aspect of laboratory quality, which is the quality management system, like I've said, another aspect is when you are looking at what we call quality manual. Now, what exactly is quality manual? We're going to define quality manual. When you talk about quality, like we've said, quality means ensuring that there is accuracy, there is reliability, reproducibility of results, okay? So that is quality. Now, when you talk about manual, you are then looking at documentation of how those quality can be maintained, or how to ensure that you are able to carry out processes that can ensure that overall will be to arrive at the quality maintenance of that very test. For example, remember that there's what we call standard operating procedure. So there are documentation there. So that documentation that shows you who can carry the test, when it can be carried, the sample that can be used, the processes to carry the test are the manual. Now, those information there is to make sure that it goes to be quality. In other words, the result you are going to generate will be reliable, it will be reproducible, okay, it will be accurate. So that is a quality manual. So in quality manual, you are going to see quality manual should be able to describe the quality management system of the laboratory to the staff and also to the service user. It defines when I talk about the laboratory structures, the management and all of that, it describes the management responsibility, the staff responsibility, okay? So it shows the management structure and its responsibility, okay? Meaning that every staff will know their responsibility even at the managerial level. Then in the quality manual, so you can look at something like documentation control, so that it will tell you how you can be able to control a particular document, how you can be able to file it, how it can be stored, how it can be accessed, who should be able to access it. There will be a lot of information there to see that in assessing those documents, that it is well controlled, so that it will not be on the wrong hand, so that someone else that's supposed not to see the document or access the document will not be able to access that document. And of course, with the quality manual, you are going to see the equipment used in the laboratory. It's also going to show you who can be able to do the maintenance on that equipment, how the equipment is validated. A lot of information about the equipment will also be in this very quality manual. Then it's also going to tell you something like requirement of the UCAS accreditation. So it will show you their requirement of accrediting the laboratory. In other words, for you to be able to maintain your accreditation or accreditation license, you need to continue to function according to the UCAS or maybe each of these very country accreditation laboratory license. And remember, like I've said, they all link with the ISO laboratory standard. The quality manual should also contain the pathology laboratory quality policy. In other words, how they intend to achieve that very quality, or their commitment to their service user to ensure that they are able to they will continue to maintain quality. So it should be able to all those information should be there, okay, under quality manual. And the information in this very quality manual need to be according to the quality management system. In other words, there has to be an information detailing on how to make sure what is in the quality management system that is documented is actually what is happening. In other words, you have to reconcile with what is happening in the laboratory and what is in the quality management system to enforce, to see. So there has to be a guideline and to show how to make sure that what is in the quality management system is actually what is happening in the laboratory. And of course, that is where audit comes in. And of course, with the quality manual, you're going to show evidence. It also has to contain evidence of the reviewing of that very document. That's why each of the documents, if you've worked in the laboratory, you can have version maybe 1.2 something or 2. So the version will continue to change as they review and update that very document. Every member of staff must be acquainted, must be familiar with those information, because that is the only way we can continue to ensure that we maintain standard in the laboratory. If needed, it can be formatted, edited, or as the case may be. And like I've said before, each of these very information has to be according to the requirement of ISO laboratory standard. Maybe for example, ISO laboratory 15189. So it has to be according to that very standard, because that is a requirement, and which UCAS is a member of ISO laboratory standard. Of course, like I've mentioned in other countries, that way every laboratory will be able to be within conformance that reflects the policy of ISO laboratory standard. So then again, in that quality manual, there's also need to also highlight, okay, because in the ISO laboratory standard, okay, they have different code. Okay, even now we'll say for an example, ISO 15189, there are different subcode, okay, subsection. So when we are preparing our quality manual, we can actually prepare and continue to refer to the code or the sections of the ISO laboratory, standard code that show that this thing we are preparing, that we are using internally, is in accordance to the ISO laboratory standard. In other words, when we're preparing quality manual, we should be able to refer to which particular aspect of quality are we talking about, okay, what session are we looking at that? Then we can refer you to the ISO laboratory session where we get that information, or where we're extracting that information to be able to make our own policy in the laboratory. The question now is, what is quality manual and what is quality policy? Quality manual is a manual that fully describes the quality management of an organization, such as a laboratory, pathology laboratory, in a way that it will show that the laboratory meet up with the requirement of ISO laboratory standard, and every member of staff should be familiar with the content of that very manual. Now, what is a quality policy? So in quality policy, you are looking at the commitment. Quality policy can be defined as a commitment of the laboratory management to ensure that they provide quality services to the service users. For example, when you look at the quality testing, when you look at the calibration, okay, when you look at something like inspection, which is something like audit, okay, you look at the sampling, like the sample quality, the sample acceptance, the requirement of accepting the sample, and so on. So in other words, the commitment that this very laboratory states, which you can look at their mission statement or their vision statement, as the case may be. This is where you can get something like trust policy, or you can get the mission statement of that very laboratory. So their commitment to see that the commitment of the laboratory management to see that they produce quality services to the service user is what we call quality policy. In most NHS hospitals, you see something like, for example, we are committed to improving our services. We are committed to ensuring that we maintain standard. We are committed to ensure that we continue to review our services to continue to improve. So those commitments is what we call quality policy. I hope this makes sense. Now, what is quality management system? I'm going to define quality management system as defined by ISO laboratory. So ISO laboratory define quality management system as a coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to quality. Meaning that when we look at the activity that goes on in the laboratory, okay, to ensure that people are directed, coordinated, okay, regarding to maintenance of the quality in that very laboratory. That is called quality management system, and this is where most of these things that we've said comes in. So again, meaning that in order to ensure that the training comes in, like I've said, and therefore mean that at every level, whether pre-analytical, analytical, post-analytical, okay, everyone should ensure that, of course, when competent, that they continue to maintain the standard, because that is only way that quality management system will not fail. Don't forget about the word direct and coordinate. So they will see that people are properly trained, they will see that people are competent before they can be able to carry out that very test. And at that point, you will now see that the quality in the laboratory becomes everyone's business, okay? Meaning that because you are competent now, you should ensure that the quality is maintained in the laboratory. And the essential element of the quality management system, interestingly, is what we call laboratory audit. In other words, wherever there is a non-compliance, okay, to the quality or the standard of the laboratory, with the internal audit, with the audit, that can be able to expose, that can be made obvious, and that way that can be corrected and, of course, prevented for future occurrence. And that is where maybe further training or whatever can take place. Anyway, the core element of the quality management system is audit, especially internal audit. That way we'll make sure that everybody within the laboratory are functioning according to the standard, and that internal audit will expose where there is a non-compliance, to the standard, and that way that can be reviewed and something can be done about it. So here we go. Next time I will continue to make the video on quality management system, and we're going to look at audit, more when I make the next video. Okay, so once again, thank you very much for listening, and please can I ask you to join the group of this very YouTube channel. If you click on the join, on this video you are watching or any of my videos, you are going to see different levels of the membership. You can decide to join the one that best suits you. For example, I've created 3 membership. The one I can prioritize their comment, the one I can set up one-on-one meeting with, okay, and of course the one I can help to go through mock interview. So see what you can do, join the group, okay, and that way when you join, let me know. I can be able to guide you on how we can be able to harness the benefit of joining any of the group. Please can I ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much till I come back away again. Bye bye.